The storm had been raging for 3 days across the surface of Kepler 442c, turning the normally rust-colored sky into a churning mass of violet lightning and howling wind. Inside Station Omega-7, Kai Thorne worked alone by the blue glow of his repair console, the steady hum of machinery his only companion in the vast loneliness of neutral space. At 28, Kai had already spent 5 years on this forgotten outpost, fixing ships for whoever could pay. Imperial cruisers, rebel frigates, it didn't matter. War made everyone desperate, and desperation made everyone equal in their need for his skills. His hands, calloused from years of engineering work, moved with practiced precision as he recalibrated the plasma conduits of a damaged fighter craft. The crash came without warning. A brilliant flash of light tore through the storm, followed by a thunderous impact that shook the entire station. Emergency klaxons wailed as Kai's tools scattered across the deck. Through the reinforced viewport, he glimpsed the twisted wreckage of what had once been a sleek reconnaissance vessel, now embedded in the rocky terrain 200 meters from his bay. "Damn it," Kai muttered, pulling on his environmental suit. The storm made rescue operations dangerous, but leaving someone to die in the wreckage would haunt him forever. He'd seen enough death in this war. The wind nearly knocked him over as he stepped outside, his helmet's display flickering with interference from the electromagnetic storm. Each step toward the crash site was a battle against the howling gusts that threatened to send him tumbling across the jagged rocks. The ship was worse than it had looked from inside. The hull was cracked open like an egg, sparks still cascading from severed power lines. Kai activated his helmet's searchlight and peered into the twisted cockpit, expecting to find a corpse. Instead, he found her. She was unlike any being he'd ever seen. Humanoid but distinctly alien, with skin that seemed to shimmer with an inner light despite the blood that matted her silver hair. Her features were delicate yet strong, with high cheekbones and lips that were pale from shock. But it was her eyes that stopped him cold when they fluttered open, deep violet, filled with pain and something else he couldn't quite identify. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the storm. I'm defecting, seeking asylum." Kai's hand instinctively moved to the plasma cutter on his belt. She wore the uniform of the Hegemony Intelligence Corps, the same organization that had been hunting human settlements for 3 years. Every instinct screamed at him to leave her here, to let the storm claim another enemy agent. But as she struggled to sit up, wincing in pain, he saw the desperation in her eyes. Real or not, her injuries were severe. A gash along her left temple bled freely, and the way she held her ribs suggested internal damage. "My name is Serafina," she said, her accent musical despite her pain. "I have information about the war, about what's coming." Kai stared at her for a long moment, rain lashing against his helmet. The smart thing would be to walk away. The safe thing. But something in her voice, in the way she looked at him with such vulnerable hope, made him extend his hand. "I'm Kai," he said, helping her to her feet. "Can you walk?" She leaned heavily against him, and he caught the faint scent of something like starflowers even through his suit's filters. "I think so. Thank you, Kai." The journey back to the station was treacherous. Serafina stumbled several times, her alien physiology clearly struggling with the planet's gravity and atmospheric pressure. By the time they reached the medical bay, she had lost consciousness, her head lolling against Kai's shoulder. As he worked to stabilize her vital signs, Kai couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just made a terrible mistake. Every protocol said to report alien refugees to the authorities, to let the proper channels handle defectors. But something about Serafina made him hesitate. Maybe it was the loneliness that had been eating at him for months. Maybe it was the way she'd looked at him with such trust despite being a stranger. Or maybe it was simply that he'd forgotten what it felt like to be needed by someone who wasn't just paying for his services. Whatever the reason, as he sealed the medical bay doors and began treating her wounds, Kai made a choice that would haunt him forever. He would keep her secret, at least until she recovered enough to tell him the truth about why she was really here. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside the station, Something far more dangerous had just begun. Serafina's recovery was slow but steady, and Kai found himself spending more time in the medical bay than at his workbench. Her alien physiology fascinated him. Her wounds sealed themselves with an opalescent film that gradually faded as new tissue formed beneath. When she was unconscious, he caught himself studying the delicate tracery of silver veins visible beneath her luminescent skin. On the fourth day, she was strong enough to sit up and speak properly. Her voice had a melodic quality that made even mundane conversations feel intimate. "Your world," she said, gesturing weakly toward the viewport where Kepler 442c's binary suns cast dancing shadows. "It's so peaceful. No bombardments, no propaganda broadcasts. How do you stand the quiet?" Kai looked up from the medical scanner he was calibrating. "You get used to it. Sometimes I forget there's a war happening at all, until someone limps in here with their ship, shot to pieces." "I envy that," Serafina said softly. "On my home world, Astoria Prime, the war drums never stop beating. Children are born knowing the sound of air raid sirens. I couldn't bear it anymore." Something in her tone made Kai set down his tools. "Is that really why you defected, the noise?" She was quiet for a long moment, her violet eyes distant. "My younger brother was conscripted last cycle, barely 16 standard years old. They gave him a rifle and sent him to die on some frozen moon whose name I can't even pronounce." Her voice broke slightly. "He lasted 3 days. Kai felt something twist in his chest. He'd lost people to this war too. His entire engineering unit had been wiped out in a hegemony raid, leaving him the sole survivor. "I'm sorry." "The worst part," Serafina continued, "was that his death meant nothing. The moon fell anyway. All those boys died for a strategic position that lasted exactly 18 hours before the humans retook it. So you decided to run." "I decided to stop being part of the machine that devours children." She looked directly at him then, and Kai felt the intensity of her gaze like a physical touch. "You understand, don't you? The weight of complicity?" He did understand, perhaps, too well. Every ship he repaired went back into battle. Every weapon system he calibrated would take more lives. The neutrality of his station was an illusion. There was no true neutrality in war, only degrees of involvement. Over the following weeks, their conversations grew longer and more personal. Serafina moved from the medical bay to the spare quarters, adjacent to Kai's, claiming the sterile environment made her claustrophobic. He found himself looking forward to their evening talks, when he would bring her meals and they would sit together watching the storm systems roll across the planet's surface. She told him about Astoria Prime's crystal cities that sang in harmonic frequencies when the wind passed through them. He shared stories of Earth's oceans which she'd never seen, and tried to describe the smell of rain on summer pavement. Their differences seemed to enhance rather than divide them, her alienness making her somehow more fascinating, more precious. "Dao, you ever think about what you'll do when the war ends?" she asked one evening, curled up in the observation lounge's single armchair. She'd taken to wearing his spare clothes, the fabric hanging loose on her smaller frame in a way that made her seem both vulnerable and alluring. "I try not to think that far ahead," Kai admitted. "Wars have a way of disappointing optimists." "But if it did end, if there was peace?" He considered the question seriously. "I suppose I'd find somewhere quiet. Maybe a colony world where they need engineers for civilian projects. Build schools instead of weapons." "You?" "I dream of gardens," she said softly. "On Astoria, everything is metal and crystal. But I've seen holovids of Earth's forests, your flowers. I think I'd like to grow things, create life instead of participating in its destruction." That night, as Kai lay in his bunk listening to her move about in the adjacent quarters, he realized something had changed. The loneliness that had been his constant companion for years was gone, replaced by something warmer and infinitely more dangerous. 3 days later, she kissed him. It happened in the engineering bay, where she'd been watching him work on a particularly stubborn power coupling. Her presence had become natural to him. She would curl up on the spare workbench with a data pad, reading or sometimes just observing his work with genuine interest. "You're very graceful," she said, as he maneuvered the delicate components into alignment. For such large hands, Kai glanced at her, catching something in her tone he hadn't heard before. "Large hands are useful in my line of work." "They're useful for other things too," she said. And when he looked up, she was standing directly beside him, close enough that he could see the flecks of silver in her violet eyes. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, her lips cool against his. But when he didn't pull away, she deepened it, her hands finding the back of his neck. She tasted like starlight if starlight had a flavor, something clean and ethereal that made his head spin. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. "Serafina, don't overthink it," she whispered, her forehead resting against his. "We're both alone here, both refugees from a war that's taken everything else from us. Can't we take comfort in each other?" Kai knew he should be cautious, knew that mixing loneliness with proximity was dangerous, especially with someone whose past was still largely a mystery. But as she looked at him with those impossible eyes, her alien beauty made more breathtaking by her obvious desire, caution seemed like a luxury he could no longer afford. "Yes," he breathed, and kissed her again. That night, she didn't return to her quarters. The next month passed in a haze of stolen moments and growing intimacy. Serafina proved to be an eager and creative lover, her alien physiology bringing unexpected pleasures to their encounters. Her skin would glow softly when aroused, creating a constellation of light across her body that Kai found himself mapping with reverent fingers during their long afternoons together. She was insatiable in her curiosity about human sexuality, asking questions that made him blush even as they excited him. In return, she taught him the sensitive points unique to her species, the hollow of her throat where her pulse fluttered like a trapped bird, the small of her back where silver veins converged in intricate patterns that responded to the lightest touch. "Your species fascinates me," she whispered one evening as they lay tangled in his narrow bunk, her fingers tracing the scars on his chest from his military service. "So much passion, so much capacity for both creation and destruction." "We're not that different from yours," Kai replied, his hand stroking through her silver hair. "We all want the same things, don't we? Love, security, a place to belong." "Perhaps," she said, but something in her tone suggested disagreement. "Though I think humans are more trusting than my people, more willing to believe in redemption." It was during these intimate conversations that she began to mention the station's security systems. Casual questions at first. How long had he been alone here? Did he ever have visitors? What kind of technology did the neutral zones employ to maintain their status? "I'm curious about the quantum vault," she said one morning as they shared breakfast. She was wearing nothing but his shirt, and the sight of her long legs folded beneath her on the chair made it difficult for Kai to focus on her words. "The energy readings I detected when my ship crashed. That's some serious power containment you have here." Kai's fork paused halfway to his mouth. Few people knew about the vault, and fewer still understood its significance. "How do you know about that? I was Intelligence Corps, remember?" She reached across to touch his hand. "I'm trained to notice things. Don't worry, I have no interest in your station's secrets. I'm just impressed by the engineering." But she returned to the subject over the following days, always casually, always in moments when Kai's defenses were at their lowest. After lovemaking, when his mind was fuzzy with endorphins and her body was pressed warm against his side. During quiet evenings when they shared a bottle of synthetic wine and watched the aurora displays paint the sky in impossible colors. "The quantum core in your vault," she said one night, her voice dreamy with alcohol and satisfaction. "It's not just a power source, is it? I can feel it humming through the station's superstructure. That kind of energy signature. It's weapons grade. Technology. It's not a weapon," Kai said carefully. "It's a prototype energy matrix. Experimental tech that both sides wanted to keep out of the war." "But it could be a weapon," she pressed, turning in his arms to face him. Her eyes were bright, with interest. "With that kind of power output, you could destabilize a planet's core, couldn't you? Or power a fleet's worth of ships indefinitely? Theoretically. Kai was beginning to feel uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. But that's not what it's for. It's supposed to be a clean energy solution for colony worlds. Of course, she said quickly, pressing a soft kiss to his collarbone. I didn't mean to imply. I was just thinking, if someone wanted to end this war quickly, decisively, that kind of technology could make the difference, show both sides that continued fighting is futile. End the war how? A demonstration. Something to shock the military commanders into accepting peace talks. Imagine if someone could approach the negotiating table with the power to remake the galaxy's energy infrastructure. No more fighting over resources, no more worlds bombed into glass for their mineral wealth. Her words painted a seductive picture, and Kai found himself considering the possibility. The war had dragged on for 6 years with no end in sight. Billions were dead, entire star systems depopulated. If there was a way to force peace. The vault's security is biometric, he said slowly. Command codes that only I have access to. You're the only one who could make that choice, Serafina agreed, her hand sliding down his chest. The only one with the power to end this madness. That night, as she moved above him with practiced grace, her skin glowing like captured starlight, Kai found himself imagining a future where the war was over, where he and Serafina could leave this place and find one of those garden worlds she dreamed about, where her brother's death would mean something because it was the last senseless death in a senseless conflict. When she cried out in ecstasy, her back arching as waves of pleasure rippled through her luminescent form, he made his decision. I'll do it, he whispered against her throat. I'll help you get the core. She stilled above him, her violet eyes searching his face in the dim light. Are you certain? There's no going back once we take that step. I'm certain. He pulled her, down for a kiss, tasting the salt of her tears on his lips. We'll end this war together. Build something better from its ashes. She held him then with desperate intensity, as if trying to memorize the moment. I love you, she whispered. And Kai felt his heart soar even as a small voice in the back of his mind wondered why her words sounded like a goodbye. But that voice was easy to ignore when she began moving again, her body telling him all the things he wanted to hear. The quantum vault lay 3 levels below the main station, accessible only through a series of blast doors and biometric scanners that required Kai's personal authorization. As they descended the narrow service corridors in the early hours of the station's artificial night cycle, Serafina's excitement was palpable. Are you having second thoughts? She asked, her hand finding his in the dim emergency lighting. No, Kai lied. In truth, doubts had been gnawing at him for days. The more he thought about their plan, the more questions arose. How exactly would demonstrating the core's power force peace negotiations? Why was she so certain that her former contacts would listen to reason rather than simply trying to claim the technology for themselves? But those doubts evaporated when she looked at him with those trusting violet eyes when she spoke of their future together with such passionate conviction. Love, he'd discovered, was an excellent anesthetic for inconvenient logic. The vault door was a masterpiece of engineering. 3 meters of titanium steel composite inscribed with quantum encryption arrays. Kai pressed his palm to the scanner and spoke his authorization code, trying to keep his voice steady. Kai Thorne, Chief Engineer, Station Omega 7. Authorization Sigma 77 Alpha. The massive door cycled open with a pneumatic hiss, revealing the chamber beyond. The quantum core hung suspended in the center of the room, a perfect sphere of crystalline material that pulsed with internal light. Energy conduits snaked away from it in all directions, carrying power to every system on the station. It's beautiful, Serafina breathed, stepping forward. More elegant than I imagined. Kai moved to the control console and began the extraction sequence. This will take about 20 minutes. Once I initialize the containment field, we'll have a small window to transfer it to a portable housing unit. 20 minutes, she repeated, pulling out a small device that looked like a communications array. That should be enough time. Time? For what? Instead of answering, she activated the device. A holographic display materialized, showing a tactical readout of the system. Kai's blood turned to ice as he recognized the symbols. Incoming hegemony strike craft, moving fast and in attack formation. Serafina, what is that? She turned to face him, and for the first time since her arrival, her expression was completely cold. The vulnerable refugee, the passionate lover, the reformed spy seeking redemption, all of it fell away like a discarded mask, revealing something calculating and utterly ruthless beneath. A transponder, she said calmly. I've been transmitting our location and status reports since the day I arrived. The fleet will be here in approximately 18 minutes. The truth hit Kai like a physical blow. You were never defecting. Of course not. She moved to stand between him and the vault's exit, her posture shifting from lover to predator with fluid grace. Though I must admit, you made the assignment far more pleasant than I anticipated. You're quite skilled in bed for a human. Your brother died exactly as I told you, but his death was a glorious sacrifice for the hegemony, not a senseless waste. I've been feeding you carefully crafted truths, Kai. They're so much more convincing than outright lies. Kai stared at her, his mind reeling. Every intimate moment, every whispered confession, every night spent in each other's arms, all of it had been a performance. How long have you been planning this? The mission began 8 months ago when our intelligence network identified this station and its contents. Your psychological profile suggested you would be susceptible to a particular type of approach. The lonely engineer with a savior complex and a guilty conscience about his role in the war. She spoke with clinical detachment, as if describing a maintenance procedure rather than the systematic destruction of another person's heart. The crash was staged, your rescue anticipated. Even my injuries were calculated. Severe enough to require extended care, not so severe as to prevent intimate relations. A ghost of a smile played at her lips. Though I confess, your technique exceeded expectations. You might have made an excellent intelligence operative yourself if you weren't so fatally naive. Kai's hands moved over the control console without conscious thought, continuing the extraction sequence even as his world collapsed around him. Part of him noted with detached precision that the core would be ready for transport in 12 minutes. Another part wondered why he wasn't screaming, why he wasn't raging at her betrayal. Instead, he felt only a hollow ache where his heart had been, and underneath that, a recognition that shouldn't have been possible. You knew, Serafina said, watching his face with professional interest. Didn't you? Deep down, you always knew what I was. Yes, Kai admitted quietly. I think I did. The admission seemed to surprise her. Then why? Why help me? Why make it so easy? Kai was quiet for a long moment, listening to the hum of the quantum core as it prepared to leave its home of 5 years. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Because the lie was beautiful. Because for the first time in years I felt like I mattered to someone. Because I'd rather have a month of loving an illusion than a lifetime of empty truth. Something flickered in Serafina's eyes, surprise perhaps, or the faintest shadow of regret. But it was gone so quickly he might have imagined it. The fleet will be here soon, she said. They'll take the core and leave you unharmed as promised. The station's neutrality will be respected. And you? I'll be reassigned. Another mission, another identity, another lonely fool who needs to believe someone could love him. The core's extraction cycle completed with a soft chime. Kai moved to the portable containment unit and began the transfer, his hand steady despite the trembling in his chest. There's something I need to tell you, he said as he worked. Oh? I love you. He looked up at her then, meeting her eyes, directly. Not the lie you told me, not the performance you gave. I love the woman who asked about Earth's oceans with genuine wonder. I love the way you hummed while you read. I love how you looked when you thought I wasn't watching, when you let your guard down for just a moment and I could see the person underneath the spy. Serafina's composed mask slipped, just for an instant. That person doesn't exist. She does, Kai said softly. She's buried deep, but she's there. Maybe so deep you've forgotten her yourself. But I saw her and I love her, and someday, maybe years from now, maybe after this war finally burns itself out, you're going to remember what it felt like to be real with someone. The quantum core settled into its new housing with a crystalline chime. Outside, Kai could hear the first sounds of ships entering the station's docking bay. "They're here," Serafina said, but her voice lacked its earlier cold certainty. "I know." Kai sealed the containment unit and lifted it from the console. "Take it. You've earned it." She reached for the case, and for a moment their hands touched. Hers were trembling slightly. "I'm sorry," she said, so quietly he almost missed it. "No, you're not. Not yet. But you will be." The hegemony soldiers who entered the vault were efficient and professional, their weapons trained on Kai with practiced precision. Their leader, a scarred veteran with dead eyes, surveyed the scene with obvious satisfaction. "Agent Serafina, status report." "Mission accomplished, Commander Vex," she replied, her voice steady once more. The moment of vulnerability Kai had glimpsed was gone, locked away behind layers of training and necessity. "The quantum core is secured and ready for transport. Casualties? None. The asset cooperated fully once properly motivated." "Commander." Vex's gaze flicked to Kai with something approaching respect. "Smart man. Cooperation keeps everyone breathing." Kai said nothing. He stood with his hands raised, watching Serafina transform back into the perfect intelligence operative. Her posture, her expression, even the way she held herself, everything was different now, as if the woman he'd held in his arms was nothing more than a half-remembered dream. "Sir," one of the soldiers reported, "the extraction team is ready. We can be clear of the system in 30 minutes. "Good. Initialize the memory wipe protocol on all station computers. I want no trace of our visit remaining in the records." "What about him?" The soldier nodded toward Kai. "Standard protocol. Leave him alive, but ensure he can't communicate with any outside parties for at least 72 hours. By then we'll be far enough away that pursuit is impossible." As the soldiers worked to complete their objectives, Serafina approached Kai one final time. The containment case was secured to her utility belt, its soft glow visible through the transparent aluminum housing. "You won't try to stop us," she said. It wasn't a question. "No." "Because you're not a fighter?" Kai met her eyes, seeing his own reflection in their violet depths. "Because I already lost the only thing that mattered." She was quiet for a moment, studying his face as if trying to memorize it. "The war will end eventually. When it does, you'll find some garden world and try to forget what you did here," Kai interrupted gently. "You'll plant flowers and tell yourself that the peace was worth the price, and maybe it will be. Maybe all the lies and betrayals and broken hearts will add up to something meaningful in the end." "You don't sound bitter." "I'm not. You are. What this war made you, just like I am. We're both casualties, Serafina. The only difference is that I chose my wounds." Commander Vex's voice cut through their conversation. "Agent, we're moving out. Say your goodbyes." Serafina hesitated, her hand moving toward Kai's face before stopping inches away. "I want you to know," she said quietly, "the way you looked at me sometimes, like I was something precious. No one has ever looked at me like that before." "They will again," Kai said, "when you finally let them see who you really are. And if that person is as broken as I think she is, then someone will love the broken pieces too. That's what love is, seeing the damage and choosing to stay anyway." Tears gathered at the corners of her eyes, though she blinked them away quickly. "I stayed because I loved the lie more than I feared the truth," she said, echoing words he'd never spoken aloud. "Isn't that what you were going to say?" Kai smiled sadly. "No, I was going to say that you stayed because somewhere underneath all that training and armor, you're still the little girl who lost her brother and just wants the pain to stop. And that's not broken, Serafina. That's human." She stepped back as if he'd struck her, her professional mask cracking at the edges. "I have to go." "I know. Goodbye, Kai Thorne." "Goodbye." She turned and walked away without looking back, her stride quick and purposeful. The soldiers followed in formation, their boots echoing in the vault's vast emptiness. Kai watched until they disappeared up the access corridor, taking with them the only light his world had known in years. The station felt impossibly quiet after their departure. Kai made his way back to his quarters, noting absently that they'd been thorough in their memory wipe. Every trace of Serafina's presence had been erased from the computer systems, but they couldn't erase her from the spare bed where she'd slept, or from the observation lounge where they'd shared so many conversations, or from his own stubborn heart that refused to accept the obvious truth. She'd been alive from the beginning. Every kiss, every whispered endearment, every moment of apparent vulnerability, all of it carefully orchestrated to achieve a specific objective. He should hate her. He should feel used, violated, betrayed beyond measure. Instead, he felt only a vast emptiness where his hope had been. 3 days later, a neutral cargo hauler arrived to deliver replacement parts Kai had ordered weeks ago. The captain, a grizzled veteran named Torres, took one look at Kai's face and set down an unopened bottle of genuine Earth whiskey on the counter. "Whatever happened here, son, I don't want to know about it, but you look like a man who needs to get properly drunk." Kai accepted the bottle with gratitude, though he didn't open it that night. Instead, he sat in the observation lounge where he and Serafina had spent so many evenings together, watching the aurora display's paint patterns across the sky. He'd told her the truth in those final moments. He wasn't bitter. He'd chosen to believe her lie, chosen to love her despite his growing certainty that she would betray him. The pain was his own fault, a price he'd paid willingly for a few weeks of feeling truly alive. But understanding the price didn't make paying it any easier. Somewhere out there, she was delivering stolen technology to her masters, perhaps already, preparing for her next assignment. Another lonely outpost, another target whose weaknesses she would catalog and exploit. And eventually, maybe years from now, she would find that garden world she'd dreamed about. Kai hoped she would remember him then, not as the fool she'd manipulated, but as the man who'd seen her real face in unguarded moments and loved her anyway. Maybe that memory would be enough to help her find her way back to the person she'd buried beneath layers of necessity and war. The quantum core was gone, along with any hope of ending the conflict quickly. The war would grind on, consuming more lives, more worlds, more chances for peace. But in the end, that hadn't been why he'd helped her. He'd done it because for one brief, shining moment, he'd felt like he mattered to someone. Even if that someone had been a lie, the feeling had been real. And sometimes in a galaxy torn apart by war and hatred, that had to be enough.